Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be on this big, beautiful planet we call home. And welcome to Drinks and Daves. I'm Dave.
And I'm Dave. How you doing,
And
Dave?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Hey, brother, you've been quiet today.
It's
I'm a
been,
little bit worried that your wife might want to put you to work today.
yeah, I was out doing stuff. I had to do a bunch of stuff out in the yard and had to go pick up a prescription because my normal pharmacy did not have the prescription. And so I had to drive all the way to the other side of town. Hey,
Man,
P-Beat, how you doing?
Old man errands you're doing there.
Exactly. Oh, and the drink of the day is Glenmorangie 12. Good for you.
I like that. P-Beat is on it.
He's on it. We'll wait for a few more people before we get started. I'm drinking tonight. I'm slumming it. I'm doing a Jack Daniel's Zero Cola and Coke. So a Jack and Coke Zero Cola. And I am smoking a AVO 30th anniversary cigar.
Oh, that one sounds like it's more than $5.
Just a tad. Just a little bit more than
I
$5.
bet it's luxurious.
No, it's not that bad, actually. I mean, well, I guess that's a good thing to start off with. What do we consider? Luxurious as far as cigar? Hey, Bowtie, how you doing, buddy?
Price, right?
What's that?
Are you talking price?
Yes.
Oh, well, I meant luxurious as it must. Hopefully, it tastes really nice and smooth for you.
Yes, it is. It's actually very good.
Yeah.
It's
I try to stick with, so first of all, I can't buy local because our taxes are insane. So it's all mail order stuff. And
Right.
I try to stay under 10 if I can get close to 5, but then that's not too realistic.
I guess we won't talk then.
Did you use the vet? Dave always uses the vet. Dave uses the vet when it's snowing out, right?
That's true. That's true.
You're lucky you're still with us.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So
But,
for me tonight, it is my. I hate this background because I want to show you. Oh, this is terrible. It's my first independent bottling of Laphroaig. These are not easy to come by.
Yeah, I saw that you bought 2.
I bought 2, and at my first taste, it was hard to resist to buy. I went back to see if they had more. They did have more. I didn't, because I figured there's always more, right? You shouldn't stock up too much on one thing because there's always more out there. Oh, this is so good, Dave. This is like oh, brother, it's got. I'll send you a sample.
Yeah, I was going to say it doesn't seem like it's filtered at all, is it?
Oh no, and it's so it's like 53.4%.
Wow.
And it's got like the smoke is more like an Ardbeg, where it's more like the cigarette, not cigarette, but you know what I mean. It's
Yeah.
The harsher smoke, but the sweetness of Laphroaig, and no Band-Aids.
Really?
It is. It's sweet. It's a beautiful thing.
Now, was that something that K&L had bottled specifically for them?
It is exclusively for K&L wine.
Okay, so in other words, it's like in bourbon, that would be considered like a barrel pick, then I guess.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah, it is a barrel pick. It's 261 bottles total.
Wow.
It's a single bottle.
Wow. So you bought one bottle. So you bought one bottle, I assume, to put in the archives. Oh, and ladies and gentlemen, Rich is here.
Welcome, Rich. Are you trying to find his intro?
It didn't. No, it didn't work. No, I turned that. So let me try that again.
Welcome,
Rich is here.
There you go.
There we go. We're still amateurs at this.
Has
and we're kids.
Oh, you know what? I did have a there. You can get what's it by Black? Forget what it is. You can get a Scotch that has chunks of the barrel still in it. I don't know if it's gimmicky that they add them in or whatever, but the hunks. Hey, Rich, the hunks are in the room right now, buddy.
That's right.
All right, and we saw. So we got. I didn't mention it. You put it up there. He's drinking Macallan 12 Port Charlotte. I love this guy. These guys. I don't know if you're doing it for us, but these Scotch guys, respect, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we got 6 people so far. Well, we've got 7. Who's the 7th? Come on, come into the chat. Show us who you are. Bueller, anyone? Bueller?
All right, well, most of our day was. I took today off.
I figured you did since you're leaving tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know what I think I just decided I'll burn up more PTO and take a relaxing day before and after. So it's been just a slow burn of getting ready.
Well, and I also heard that you had a very, very death-defying, almost catastrophic issue that happened with your watch today.
Oh, brother. Yeah,
we got to hear this story.
So, my daughter's got an electric bike that we keep locked up outside. And I thought, well, we're going to be gone. I'm not going to leave it outside. And it's in our carport. So I'm out there taking the cover off of it to bring it inside. And I wasn't thinking. Usually when I've gotten to, now where I'm wearing the nicer watches, you take a little few, you don't cut the corner when you're going through a doorway. Or things like that, right? You try not to bang your wrist on stuff. I wasn't thinking. I'm taking this cover off the bike, and I feel my watch scraping against the cinder block that makes up the carport. And it's like, when you drop your phone, and you don't want to look, and you're just like, for this split second, as far as I know, nothing's wrong. I had that drop, right?
Oh, and man.
And I'm lucky. Not a mark on it, but boy, just for a moment there.
I was going to say, if there was a mark on it, I was going to send you some stuff that I use. But the beautiful thing about Sapphire, it's funny. It's scratch resistant as much as diamond. In fact, a diamond is the only thing that will scratch this. However, if you drop it, it'll crack like it'll crack like crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't
want to tempt it anymore.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, everybody, all our barflies for being here. We've got 8 people in. We've got, I think, 3 in the chat. Guys, please join the chat room if you can. Make a comment so we know that you're here and so we can introduce you. And also, we're going to go for a while and have our little conversation. And then towards the end of the show, we'll ask for some questions for Dave, because this one is all about nursing. So this is all about Nurse Dave. So I guess I should preface this. We had talked earlier this week that I had a real good friend of mine. He's probably retired now, but he was one of the very first male nurses. And my mom, for those people that don't know, my mom was a nurse. And as we know, I mean, for the vast majority, nursing has been considered kind of a female-dominated up until the recent times, obviously. And he was one of the first nurses, and he went through nurses training at Bellevue Hospital in New York City before it became a crazy hospital. And him being the first male nursing student, they had nowhere to put him, because at that time they had to live in the hospital while they were being trained, because they were on call 24 hours a day. So he literally for 4 years slept in a boiler room on a cot for 4 years. So I think that's awesome. And I know that Bowtie being a male nurse as well. So I guess the onus is, let me ask 2 questions back to back, and you answer them however you want. One, what is it when you're in college? What was it, or maybe you decided earlier now, what was it that made you feel that you wanted to become a nurse? And did you face, in your early years, any of the stigma that went around with that?
Yeah, well, no, I didn't want to. No, I wanted to be a nurse. I was going to be an engineer in high school until I hit, I think, pre-calculus, and I said that's enough of that. And then I was actually into photography, and so I was in college to get a Bachelor of Fine Arts. But I just loved. I've always been fascinated with the human body, how complex it is. And I just, out of interest, I like to learn about the body and how it works and all that stuff. So one of my electives, I took an anatomy class for fun and had an awesome professor and got even more interested. And while I was at the university for this, I decided it'd be fun to be a volunteer fireman, and do kind of some of the paramedic stuff too. So I started taking EMT classes at a community college while I was going to university for the Bachelor of Fine Arts. And when I was doing my ride-alongs for that, this was in a very small college town, very nice place to live. And they said, the demand for jobs here at the fire station is so high. We get, 2 job openings. We get like 20,000 applicants from all over the country. You're going to have to go work up in the big city at night, picking up drunks, to put your time in to be able to have enough experience to get hired somewhere like this. So that kind of dampered that down a little bit. And then I had knee surgery, irrelevant to this, but to be a volunteer firefighter, as you are a firefighter, so I'm
sure.
Talk about that sometime, but you have to do this physical test, right? And the first thing is they stick the ladder straight up and say, go to the top. Well, I was the first, and I didn't know that this was not timed or anything. So I thought, well, I got to show off, right? So I went as fast as I could, just wore out my knee. And so the tests after that, where you have to like carry a body backwards down the stairs of a building and stuff like that, my knee was I couldn't pass the physical. So that was the end of that adventure. I'm making a long story longer than it needs to be, I guess. But as mentioned, when I interviewed my mom on my shaving channel, I ended up dropping out of college just short of getting my Bachelor of Fine Arts. Ended up working through several things. I was working at Sears selling electronics and stuff, just, pay your rent and all this stuff. And one day I sat there thinking, this is ridiculous. This makes no difference in the world. I'm making no benefit to anybody by selling them a TV. I need to do something that makes a difference. I found out the paramedic route wasn't my thing, and I wanted to do something medical because I just was fascinated with the human body and decided to apply for nursing school. And
wow.
So that's how I got into it. And the male aspect is that now and then, it kind of ebbs and flows, is that there were more people trying to get into nursing school than there were openings. And but I was told when I applied, I'd have no problem because I was a guy. And that's a minority in.
Oh, so it was almost a reverse. So it was almost a reverse type of situation. Now that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So they had to do a lottery to get into nursing school, but they told me I'd be in. Yeah.
Wow. Now, did you do your nursing school at your same undergraduate college?
No. In fact, so this is interesting. I went to community college for nursing, so I had almost a degree. It started all over at a community college, and I just had my diploma. I was a diploma nurse when I first started, and I worked that way for a very long time. I worked all my way up to a management job without a bachelor's degree in anything. That now you wouldn't be able to do that most places.
Now, as a diploma nurse from a community college, you were still, you weren't an LPN, you were an actual RN, though. You were a registered nurse, correct?
Yep. And it's interesting to, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just, no, go ahead. I just wanted to clarify for some people that may not know that, the difference, that you've got a nurse's aide, you've got a licensed practical nurse, you've got a registered nurse, you've got a licensed nurse practitioner, and then, so that's pretty interesting that you went, because as far as I know, you have your master's in nursing now, correct? Yeah. So that's a pretty amazing transition, and I assume that you worked all different positions in the hospital, such as emergency, pediatrics, general floor, or no?
Well, I worked in the emergency room as a certified nursing assistant. So the way it worked was, after your first year of nursing school, you covered everything you had to in terms of being a nurse's aide, and you just paid some money and you got your certification for that. And that was my first job in the hospital. And what I thought I wanted to do was be an emergency department nurse, because that's when the ER TV show was out, right? And that's where cool people were. And you mentioned guys being a minority, and it tends to be the ED and the ICU is what attracts a lot of the guys, right? Like kind of the high testosterone, fast-paced stuff. But I found out when I worked in the ED that the more acute patients, the really interesting stuff, the more hurt they are, the quicker they get them out of the ED. That they go into the surgery or they go to the ICU, and you really don't get to care for them that long.
Right. I guess we need to clarify one thing because you're speaking, you're speaking in technical terms. For those people in our in our room, ED does not stand for erectile dysfunction. In this case, it stands for emergency department. Just wanted to clarify that, just in case we get a little bit of the weirder people in here going, "Hey." Sorry.
So I wanted to then be in the ICU, where that's where the blood and the guts and the super intense stuff is. And I talked to the manager of the ICU saying, hey, I'm graduating soon. Would you hire me on? And she said, go work on a med surg floor, a non-ICU floor. You get down your organizational skills first and come back and see me. And I had a professor who I don't know what she saw in me, but she goes, I think you'd be great in pediatrics. And I had no clue what I wanted to do. And I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I loved, so that was my first job, was in pediatrics. Loved it. And so that's the majority of my floor nursing is in pediatrics.
I would imagine, being in pediatrics, that, because my mom was a surgical, she was a nurse in the Army first, and then she became a surgical nurse at a local hospital here. But I would imagine pediatrics could, and tell me if I'm wrong, could have the best feeling of wow, you're really helping us out, but at the same time, it could also be the most heartache, where you can't get too involved personally, because I have a friend of mine whose child died of pediatric brain tumor, and I've seen the children's wards and the NICU units and stuff like that. And how did you handle when it didn't go so well in a pediatric ward, or did you ever have to worry about that much?
100%. Well, and we're pretty open and honest on this show, so I'd just say crying in the shower. That's you have to deal with things. It's your job. So one of the first things I learned that was a shocker was cystic fibrosis patients. They at that time came in fairly frequently, usually a couple times a year. That's when your lungs are kind of gummed up, and you have to. It gets bad enough you have to come into the hospital and get more aggressive breathing treatments and antibiotics and antivirals and stuff. And but these kids tended then to die in their teen years or early 20s. You didn't live long if you had cystic fibrosis. And bow ties, knowing about this, they call them coming in for the tune-ups.
Sure.
And it's funny because some of the kids would try to game it a little bit to come in around Christmas time. Because if you're in a pediatric hospital or in Christmas time, you make bank.
You're spoiled, sure.
Yeah. But early on, as a new nurse, I walked in and with my preceptor into one of the cystic fibrosis kids' rooms and found out they were planning their own funeral. They were deciding how they wanted it to go and what music would be there. And you hear a kid say that, just a matter of fact, like, they're not scared, they're not worried. You're just, wow, that's a different reality.
Yeah. Now, did you work? Did you always work in the San Francisco area, or were you working up in Oregon?
No, I went to school in Oregon, and that's where I got my first job, was Oregon Health Sciences University.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was great because it's, in terms of pediatric hospitals, it was fairly small. And so they had an ICU, they had an oncology ward, and then where I worked was everything else. So we got to see, in one day, you could be working with a kid that just had, leg surgery on their bone, and I could have a, 4-month-old that had open heart surgery 3 days ago, and a cystic fibrosis kid. And, we saw everything. So actually a lot of fun.
Well, and and the thing is, it's funny, the contrast, because as what I did in the military is that we had a golden hour. Basically we had what's called the golden hour, and if we could get them stabilized within that golden hour, or however long it took us to fly from the LZ to the hospital, that was our thing. But then we handed it off, so we never got to see the finality, whether that be good or bad. I mean, of course, we lost some, en route, but so to me, that would have been very fulfilling. And a lot of people always ask me why I never went in that, because I would hear the stories of my dad and my mom. They'd sit at the dinner table and talk about what happened at the hospital all day. So with that being said, take us through the transition, if you can, from being a regular nurse to, if you did become a charge nurse, and after that, how you ended up in San Francisco with Kaiser, and then what was the decision that you made to go into the management level rather than just the standard patient care?
Yeah, well, all that's a little bit intermixed, and I guess I just always wanted to do what's next kind of a thing. So even as a floor nurse, I remember early on asking my boss, like, hey, if you have any open positions in like a committee or something, I just want to know how everything else works. And so it's kind of like that, always asking about, can I do this? Can I help with that moves you up? So in Oregon, I did become a charge nurse on that floor, which was almost 50 beds. So in terms of the size of management, you were a charge nurse, but it was a pretty big role. But you fluctuated in and out of being a charge nurse and a floor nurse. So you were doing it all at that time. When I moved down to California, I actually started working at Packard's Children's Hospital at Stanford. And they were opening a new unit out physically away from their hospital, a general pediatric unit. And I was the first one hired there. It was myself and a whole bunch of travelers. They had to get travelers in there to staff it up. And that's where I was a floor nurse for a while. And then there's an opportunity to move into assistant manager. And myself and somebody else were assistant managers in units that were right next to each other. And they were in between managers. And they said, hey, you guys are doing such a great job. We'll just make you managers. We feel we can get rid of one position. We'll just promote you both. And so that kind of happened on its own. And that was the tough transition, is going from a floor nurse to being an assistant manager, because you go from having a direct effect on a patient, because, you do something and relieve their pain in 20 minutes, you were the reason that they're relieved, or you educate a family and make them feel more comfortable or relieved or give them hope. That's an immediate effect. And when you're a manager, it took me about 6 months to feel like I still had a purpose, almost, that you giving your staff what they need to do their jobs well is affecting everybody on the unit. Because that's tough to see when you make that transition.
Real quick before you go on, I just wanted to before we get too far into the rest of the evolution, and I'm basing a lot of this on what my mom used to complain about, is because obviously probably when you started, nurses' pay wasn't where it's at now. Obviously, number one. Number two, the whole idea of having nurses' aides and stuff like that. At least when my mom was a nurse, they were the nurses' aides. They did everything, and when it got to that, and then traveling nurses, they didn't have that. Most of the time they worked a 8-hour shift, whether it be Monday through Friday or Sunday through Thursday, whatever the case may be. So can you explain to some people that may not know, that are listening, what exactly is a traveling nurse? And did you ever see those situations where now you look on your staff and say, wow, I remember I was cleaning bedpans and doing all this other stuff, and now not so much?
Well, it's interesting. Some of that stuff is cyclical. So first of all, the traveling nurses is that now that's a matter of course, that people will take temporary contracts. It's usually 8 weeks or 16 weeks, somewhere in there, to go work for somebody that has a temporary need, right? So our hospital will hire traveling nurses, and I think most do in the wintertime, because you have flu season or something like that. Your census goes up. You don't staff for that high of a census all year long, and you need a little extra help. And so these travel nurses can go, it's up to them, but they can go all over the country, or just stick to a generalized area. And so For the most part, you see younger nurses, not always, but people that don't have families to tie them down and they want to see different parts of the country, stuff like that. And it tends to pay pretty well, um, just because you're making a bit of a sacrifice to go somewhere. And then depending on your contract, they'll pay for your housing because you've got to stay somewhere where you go there. And then some people get a rental car, or they'll get flights paid to go back home once a month, stuff like that.
So it can be pretty lucrative then.
It can be, depending on what they do. Some people don't have like a home apartment or something like that, and then that can be super lucrative. I've heard if you go work in Hawaii, that's kind of like people want to go work there, so you pretty much break even because it's kind of expensive to live there.
Sure,
and they don't
sure.
pay a lot because people want to go there. But
Right.
but then yeah, go.
Well, no. So when you made the transition into the position you're at now, and this can be kind of a follow up at the tail end of what you're explaining. When you have a traveler's nurse and they're under contract, does that change, or does that change the way you manage that team as opposed to people that are permanent employees of yours, so to speak?
So let me first say that you mentioned where I work. So I'll say anything I say in this podcast is my experience and my thoughts. They're not reflective, just, something I have to be careful about. It shouldn't, unless it's a skill thing. I'll say that sometimes, maybe you've got chemo you give on your floor, and the travel nurses aren't certified to give chemo, so they shouldn't have those patients, or special things like that. That's where it should have an effect. You do see places that, because these are nurses that aren't part of your own staff, that you'll kind of give them the difficult patients or the ones nobody wants, because they really can't complain too much. And that's where I kind of feel like it shouldn't be that way.
Sure.
I made a big point of not doing that because, one, you can get a reputation amongst the travel companies for doing that. And then, sometimes you get good relationships with your travel nurses, and they'll hire on permanently, or they'll come back season after season. So,
Sure.
you should have the same respect for all nurses, regardless of why they're working for you.
Right. And so when you're in your position that you're in now, and obviously you have your master's in nursing now, and I know that some of us here have kind of been through with you through that journey of getting it. I like that. So do you find the job you're in now, being, and I would assume a high level management position, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I would assume that's the case. Would you say that it's more fulfilling, or do you miss the interaction with, whether it be the kids or whether it be the patients?
No, that's so I'll explain a little bit. So I'm the director of quality now. So I'm not in operations really at all. And the job of my department is, healthcare is very data driven now, right? With the electronic medical record, we can pull all sorts of stuff. And so we have to monitor an awful lot of things. So we kind of package that data and give it to senior leaders, all down to the frontline staff, but then also say, hey, here's an area we could do better in. Let us help you figure out what we're going to do to improve whatever it is, right? I mean, that's it in a very small nutshell.
Sure.
So I'd say at my age, I don't miss being on the floor at all. I can't imagine, working 12-hour shifts. They work 8 hours here, but I used to do 12. They would be killer now.
Sure.
So from that aspect, I certainly don't mind not being away from the bedside. But again, now that we are monitoring the outcomes of patients and patient safety items and things like that, it is easier to see when you make improvements, it's affecting everybody in the entire hospital, not just a unit or not just for one shift.
So it's a pretty big responsibility.
Yeah.
Well, okay, and I know that this is probably the big elephant in the room, and somebody was probably going to ask it when we get to the question and answer period. But, and I know it's been discussed ad nauseum and various things, but please speak a little bit on what it was like from November 2020 through this, and of course we're speaking about during the COVID thing, because I know you and I had conversations throughout the whole thing, and I can't even imagine what it was like.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get political for sure.
Sure.
So from our aspect, the most difficult, that was one of the most difficult things to watch, because I'm not a frontline nurse, was the struggles and the frustrations of the frontline nurses, because we didn't know what we were dealing with. So I was kind of on the management side, and we were pretty much getting day-to-day updates from the CDC. So, as they were finding things out, we were finding things out. And, you've heard me say on my shaving show many times that, we were learning, right? This isn't something we had dealt with before. And that's the way science works, is you keep doing research and you learn something new and you adjust to it, and you learn something new and adjust to it. But when you're on the front lines, and it's scary as heck, because people really don't know what's going to happen to them if they get this. We didn't have immunizations then. We really didn't have any treatments at that point. And we're telling the frontline staff, oh, today we say you're supposed to wear this. No, wait, okay, now today you're supposed to wear this. It was based on, because we kept learning things. But as a frontline staff, they're like, this is my health that you're messing with.
Right.
And while I wasn't exposed like they were, you got that feeling like, hey, their frustration and their anger sometimes about things constantly changing. It made sense why it was, but that's, your own people that are going through that.
Sure.
That was one of the most difficult things. And then, the general public even understood that even less. So when you hear from people who weren't in the same room with a COVID positive patient complaining about, oh, you want me to wear a mask to go to the mall? It's like,
Right.
Really? This person is caring for your family members or your neighbor or whatever is wearing one, for a 12-hour shift or whatever. And, that's where it got. I had to stop watching the news.
Yeah. Well, I know that you and I
couldn't watch that anymore.
Well, I know that you and I talked about it quite frequently about that, and I can see the frustration. Now, have you noticed since then? Is there a level, and being, obviously being a quality manager, an operations manager, whatever the case may be, you have more of a global look. Looking down on a global type scenario. Do you find that you see the cynicism or the frustration, or the big buzzword now is RN burnout? People are leaving. People are saying, yeah, I made great money, but I can't do it anymore. Did you, because being in a fairly populous area, is that something that you saw evolve over time, and is it getting better now?
Luckily, we didn't have to deal with that as much as some other places, I think. But because they had to go through all of that, and it was an interesting evolution, because everybody saw that, right? We had behind the hospital and across a little gully are some apartment buildings, and somebody would play music at 5:00 every day for the healthcare workers, right? And we got the military flyover, and then we got the police and the fire people that come and honor us and all that stuff in the first year, when it was really like, hey, these healthcare workers. And then, it's been talked about many times. That kind of changed, right? And then it became less support. Hey, we're not going to wear masks. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. And the healthcare workers are still in the middle dealing with all this, feeling like we're not being supported. We're trying to save lives, and you're not trying to save yourselves. And on top of that, the hospital census was, you saw it on the news. It happened even locally, that we hit a census we'd never had in the history of the hospital. And, you have the morgue trailer backed up to the back of the hospital just in case, and things like that, that I think that it makes sense that it drove the burnout.
Now, do you find, now with being quality, do you have a lot of interaction with the line staff anymore, or are you more or less in a chain that, that if you guys see something from a quality standpoint, you'll talk to the charge nurses and the nurse managers, and they will filter that down to their staff more or less now?
For me, mostly that. I have some nurses that are in my department that go out and round and talk to the frontline staff. And so it's kind of like touching base with them about, here, let's concentrate on this for today. Let's emphasize, reducing falls
Sure.
or reducing pneumonia or whatever it is.
Well, and I would imagine also that the quality side of things, like quality management in the and like I said, I can only base, from the stories I heard from my mom, that the quality, meaning, the environmental health of your employees, is now seeming to be much more important than it was back in the day, the Florence Nightingale days, so to speak. So if you could speak on that, and also, have physicians began to treat nurses better now than they used to? Because I know for a while, at least back then, a doctor would come to a nurse and say blah blah blah, and sometimes they could be very, very condescending towards RNs. Did you? I don't know if you ever experienced that, or if you even see it anymore. I would doubt that you see it that much anymore.
It depends where you work. More than I think the time frame. Well, I guess probably they put up with it a lot less than they used to. But when I was actually in nursing school, it was ironic because where I ended up working was a teaching hospital. So they were used to students and interns and educating and things like that. And I think especially in pediatrics, it's more of like teamwork, and you get physicians that are just, I hate to paint it with a broad brush, but seem more friendly than maybe some of the other specialties.
Sure.
But then I was in a small community hospital doing one of my rounds as a student nurse, and I needed a patient's chart. And this nurse came running over and said, "Do you have this chart?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to document in it." And she said, "Well, the doctor's rounding. He has to have the charts for all his patients laid out on the desk waiting for him." I'm like, what? I need this to, what? And it's just like, so that, I think, and if you're in a smaller community, like they're revered as gods kind of thing, that probably is still out there.
Sure.
But
Well,
HR plays a bigger role in stuff too.
I know we were going to wait until the very end to do the questions from our barflies, but Tig Lily puts out a real good question. It says, weird question. Have you guys, and this could be to Bowtie too, have you guys ever had a patient who came in with no vitals and appeared by all clinical standards to be deceased, and then they end up being revived? You hear stories about this. Welcome, Linda.
Well, yeah, I've got a story I'm gonna tell, and it's not that they came in without a heartbeat or weren't breathing, but this was one of those, and I was thinking about what you might ask about, and so I'll just preface it by saying, some people say things are miracles, and some miracles just because we don't understand 100% how the human body works, and it's just how it works, but we can't explain it. But I had a patient who was in a car accident. A teenager was thrown free of the car, so she wasn't found for quite some time after the accident because they didn't know she was in the accident. When they put in the breathing tube, they accidentally put it into her stomach, so she still wasn't getting air. And so she was without oxygen for who knows how long, right? She was basically a vegetable when she was on the floor. And she kind of woke up and was responding a little bit and this and that. And the doctor had just been in to talk to the family, and he said, she's really, who knows what's going to come of this, but she's not going to walk again. I don't know what kind of life she's going to have. The grandma pulled me out of the room afterwards and wanted a better explanation as to, is there really no chance? And I kind of had to reinforce that. I'm like, she was without oxygen for a very long time. She was walking in the hallway 2 days later.
Wow.
Should not have happened. Had all sorts of brain damage, right? So it's stuff like that you do see sometimes. And that's one super cool thing about pediatrics is that kids tend to bounce back from all sorts of stuff either quickly or that maybe they shouldn't.
Now, Linda's your mom, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, before we get to Linda's question, and Linda, I hate to put you on the spot, but you are known in our household as the penguin lady. So just so you know, because my wife loves penguins, that's an incredible story. And, and I think that probably leads to, that adage of, and it's got to be frustrating sometimes when you don't want to give up. But sometimes all the data or all the data shows that, hey, there's nothing going to happen. But you have to have that one small thing in your back that says, well, this is the fact. We're not saying it can't. We're not saying it could. So, first and foremost, before anything else, we appreciate what you do. And for all the nurses out there, Bowtie and everybody else. But I'm interested in this question from Linda. It says, talk about your patient-centered care program at Stanford.
This is my mom just wanting me to brag on myself. Or brag for her son.
Well, hey, you're her baby. Why not?
It is. So it's interesting, and this is why I miss operations. And I almost told my boss I want to. So by operations, I mean nursing manager, nursing director, right, where you're kind of in charge and working with the staff, directly providing care for the patients. Right? I get weekends off, I get holidays off.
Right.
I'm separate from operations, but I've told her I miss that's the one thing I miss is operations, quick decisions, all this. And part of it is because I want to have more influence over the frontline staff around how they talk and treat the patients. And so that's what this is about, is that I used to present when I worked for Stanford at every new hire orientation, something called the patient point of view. And it's just, and I try not to get too passionate about it.
Well, no, you should.
It's one thing that's just the core to me of being a nurse, is that you think about what it's like to be your patient all the time. And that's what I presented to every new employee, whether or not they worked, in finances or the parking garage or whatever, because you never know who you're coming across, how you influence their day, that kind of stuff. So I spent a good 20 minutes just trying to think about what it's like to be that patient in your bed for that day, right? Just the basics of, for anybody that works in the hospital, that's our place of work. We're used to it. Most people don't have to be in a hospital. So it's a very uncomfortable feeling, right? We strip away your privacy, we strip away your choices, and trying to make people conscious of that and act in a way that's in the forefront of their mind, right? So try to give choices back to your patients. Try to treat things like when you order your lunch. If you're a patient, you're laying in your bed staring at a TV with like 6 channels or whatever, just bored out of your mind. Lunch is coming. If they screwed up your lunch, how big of a disappointment is that, right? To the nurse, whatever. You ordered chicken and you got the fish, you got lunch, just eat it, right? But to the patient, they were looking forward to that for 3 hours.
Sure.
So it's that kind of philosophy, right?
Well, you bring up a good point, because in the times that I've been in the hospital, you can almost tell the nurses that have gone through a similar type of program like what you're saying, is because they have that compassion. Because they may be in charge of 10, 12 rooms, whatever the case may be, and so they're seeing people from different different ethnicities, different personalities, different levels of sickness and stuff like that, and to be able to balance all that without becoming cynical is very important. So I think what your mom said about having that patient-centered care program, I think that in itself is something that, if you were going to put a cherry on top of your career, that would be one thing that I think would be very important, because you don't hear people in the medical field talking about, okay, let's strip through all this other crap and let's look at us through their eyes. And how are they responding? Hence the reason why you hear people say, God, I'd never go to that hospital again. They don't care. And just a little thing of just saying, hey, Mr. Jones, how you doing today? How you feeling? Anything you'd like to talk about? Those type of things are huge. So I think your mom bringing that up was extremely extremely important. And I'll do one final question, and then we'll open it up to everybody who's here. Um, do you do you see yourself ever going back into operations at this point, or do you think that?
My boss asks me that from time to time. It's still a no, just because, especially at the level I'm at now, it's a 24/7 job.
Right.
And when you have to deal with staffing and running out of beds and things like that, so that I take calls
Sure.
for the hospital a week at a time, but it's 5 or 6 times a year. If you're the director of nursing, you're on call like all the time.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that holds me back, is that I'm not ready to jump back in always being on.
Now, did you make the decision consciously or for position to get your master's in nurses or in nursing? And I would assume, knowing you the way I do, that it was just the next logical level for you.
It was both. So as I mentioned, I got up into a manager level job without a bachelor's, which and that was at Stanford, which is very much about education. And
Sure.
so that's kind of been my whole career, is that my work spoke for itself and people knew I could do the job. But there comes a time when you got to have the paper to back it up. Otherwise, you can't move up any farther. Or, kind of layoffs in healthcare are cyclical too, right? They'll be that's another fallout of COVID, is it was expensive as heck. You talk about travel nurses. You had hospitals across the country fighting for staff for these high censuses, right?
Mhm.
And I forget the number what we were paying per hour, and I probably shouldn't even say it if I
Sure,
recall,
sure.
but we outbid most of the country to make sure we had enough staff for our patients. So
Wow.
anyway, so sometimes they base layoffs on education too. Who doesn't have this degree? Who doesn't have that? So that is why I went back to get my bachelor's, for sure, was to kind of be layoff resistant.
Hmm.
And now for sure, I got a director level job without a master's, and that's pretty unusual too.
Right.
So this is what I need for my job. And then if I were to move up at all,
Right. I
that's
get
something
it.
I would need.
Well, tell you what, Dave, that fascinating subject matter, and I appreciate it. It's, a lot of times it's very hard to be put under, not necessarily the microscope, but to be, asked questions, because and for those of you out in the bar, so to speak, this was not pre-rehearsed. Dave had no idea what questions I was going to ask. So let's take some questions from the barflies, and we'll go with the first one from the Enabled Shaver. What's the most bizarre medical situation your hospital has encountered from an emergency room patient, if you can remember?
Well, so I think I mentioned this on a Zoom call. I'll mention one from the ED, but I didn't spend most of my time there. So the most bizarre thing people hear about is that we still use medicinal leeches.
Mm-hmm.
I think I explained this on a Zoom call once. That,
Sure.
you lose a finger, they can sew it back on, and it's easy to get blood out to the finger, but it's harder to get it back into the body. So you stick leeches on it so you keep that blood flow through that finger so it can heal. So that's a little odd. The first time you're told that your patient's going to be getting leeches and you have to go in and apply them.
But do you offer after that? Do you offer to deep fry them with a little bit of cocktail sauce?
It's a hospital. You can't deep fry in the patient rooms.
No. I'm talking about the
you'd have to be
leeches.
like
I'm talking about the
sashimi.
leeches. No. Yeah,
Right.
no. You deep fry the. Yeah. Okay. Just kidding. Okay. Well, I know that when we talked before the show, you didn't want it to be all serious, so I had to throw that in. Okay.
Yeah.
From PB, are you pro or con for how medicine is changing? That is, hygienists in dentistry want to be considered independent contractors. How do you feel about that model being applied in nursing, from a management standpoint or from an operational standpoint?
I'm going to maybe just have to guess on this because I don't know about what's happening with hygienists being independent. From a nursing perspective, I don't know how you would act. So right, you've got people that are called independent practitioners, right? So like physicians, things like that, who have the license to basically write orders, give this medication to the patient, do this for a patient, right? They're allowed to make those decisions. more and more over time, actually, it's gone backwards for nurses, where we used to make some judgments as to what should happen with the patients. And this is one of those, for patient safety and because of medical errors and stuff like that, that it's gone backwards, that sometimes you've got nurses maybe making decisions that they shouldn't have, or it shouldn't have been their decision anyway. And there's more and more and more control over what decisions a nurse can make now. So that's what I think of as independent operators, unless it's like that you get hired separate from an employee of the hospital, like you're a contractor or something like this. And I don't know, that's a whole different thing, right? Because unions are huge, at least on the West Coast. I know kind of, then that's an interesting difference too, is that nursing is very different in different parts of the country. So I think the whole West Coast, Oregon, California, and Washington, they have what nursing ratios, right? So in pediatrics, I couldn't have more than 4 patients. As with adults, I think they can have 6, it might be 5, but they limit the number of patients that a nurse can have. In other parts of the country, they don't have that. And so it's very interesting when you have some states where a nurse could have 10 patients, and then you've got some states where you can only have 5, and you still complain that I've got too many patients, I don't have enough time. But it's the same thing with pay, that pay in states that have a lot of unions is a lot higher than you hear what people make kind of in the Midwest for nursing. And it might be middle class, lower middle class. It's a little surprising, where I won't quote numbers, but in California with the strong unions, they're doing pretty well.
I figured there would be. Any other questions for Dave before we wrap things up? So, Dave, I've got one quick question, unless we get some more. I don't know if Mike's still here. Michael's still here, but okay. Here's one. Does your hospital? Actually, I'm gonna real quick, Enabled Shaver. I'm gonna hold that for a second, because that's actually a very important question. So I'm gonna hold that for a second. But let me ask one final question of you, Dave. Where do you see nursing going from kind of that global perspective that you see? Do you see technology really being, really being forefront in nursing? And do you ever see where you may actually consider seeing an AI nurse? I know that sounds funky, but
it doesn't sound funky, and it's not. Well, it's kind of AI. So we already currently have what we call advanced alert monitoring. So like I said, everything's electronic. So running in the background of our electronic health records is a program that's constantly looking for warning signs that something is going a little bit funky with the patient, that it might pick up before the doctor or the nurse. And it shoots off an alert onto the computer screen saying, hey, take a look at this, it's a little bit concerning. And we have an ICU nurse go look at that patient. We have all sorts of alerts. And again, it depends on the size of your system. So if you come into our system and you have sepsis, right? Sepsis still has a huge mortality rate by the time you get to the hospital. But if you come in and the doctor isn't ordering antibiotics, isn't giving you fluids, they'll start getting pop-ups on the screen reminding them to do this stuff.
Wow.
Right? So we've got that going on. We have what is in place in about half our hospitals, and the rest are coming online. It's like a virtual ICU, where in every ICU is going to be a camera, so that if a nurse is concerned about a patient, they can connect to a remote doctor who can look at the patient, can see the vital signs, can have a conversation with the room. And then we're trying to move forward with it. If you have a patient, I don't do pediatrics anymore. So in the adult hospital, a lot of folks are old, and you have some folks that kind of have dementia or other things. And part of the problem is just keeping them in the bed and not hurting themselves, right? Well, that takes a person sitting in that room who isn't cheap, making sure that happens. And we're working on cameras that will have a central monitoring system again that they can watch. And then if they see them starting to move, they'll, phone into that room saying, "Hey, Mr. Smith, get back into bed." And if they're not responding, then they call somebody down there. So we're starting already to see.
Yeah, so kind of like the next evolution of those fall monitors that you see a lot of patients, that's connected to the bed that'll send out an alarm, but this will be more of a thing. So PB'd asked kind of a strange question, but do you remember? Have you ever seen any shaving emergencies? And not shaving down under, but anything where somebody
now. And I told myself, this is not an all-medical audience, so I can't get too deep. But I will say one of the grossest things that I've seen, and I won't go into too much detail. I did my senior rotation in a burn ward and went into the OR operating room where they had to cut off the dead flesh. It's burnt. It's got no blood. So you got to get rid of it. And they used a thing that looked like a medical machete. That thing was over 3 feet long, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
That was
so, of course, Rich, we don't want to know what you're using a Bic and Edge gel for. That's for another another subject.
I've never seen that on a video, so I have to assume that.
Yeah, and if you really want to see a lot of medical shaving emergencies, just over time, just go on the Shaving Cadre and look at when we first all started shaving. You'll see plenty of fillets and slices. So we're getting down to the wire here. First of all, I want to thank all of our barflies, and don't forget on both channels you can get your Drinks and Dave merchandise. So wear your shirt, get yourself a coffee mug. Don't have to put coffee in it. But here, the final question that Enabled Shaver comes with, and this will lead into what we're going to give a little teaser for our next episode. Does the hospital provide you good coffee? I already know the answer to this question. Yeah. Or do you bring your own?
I bring my own. When I worked in the ED, the coffee was so bad I had to mix in half a pack of hot chocolate to make it palatable. That stuff. Yeah, that was rough. So what Dave is talking about is our next show in 1 week, next Monday, 5 o'clock, is going to be about coffee, and it's our first episode. I'm excited about this, Dave.
Yes.
Where we have a guest. We've got a guest from a company called Burke's Beans. He does his own roasting. He makes my Nurse Dave Shaving World coffee, which is what I drink in my office. I use a what do you call that thing I use now?
A press?
AeroPress.
French press?
I use AeroPress in my office. So I pre-ground my coffee and bring it in little dosed vials, and I make it in my office.
PB just said great. And this will date people, though. I was hoping you were like Quincy at the coffee machine.
Yeah. Well, you know what? And the
Jack Klugman.
I worked at before this, when I still worked in quality, they had the big office coffee machine and used Major Dickinson. Is that what it is?
Yeah. Yep.
That I realized, if you ever read the back of a package of the industrial stuff, it says that it's meant to be diluted. So it's meant to be brewed strong, and you can dilute it down to the level you like. I don't think most people know that, and they drink that pretty. So that's here. You ready? Here's my recipe. You fill a cup up with ice. Fill it up with ice. You take 2 of the creamers, you put it on top, and then 2 of your sweetener packets on top, and then you fill it up with coffee, and you get a nice milky little sweet, and it dilutes it out. Beautiful.
Well, that's great. Well, Dave, thank you so much. Like I said, sometimes it's hard to be put on the whatchamacallit, to tell about yourself, because that's the hardest thing to do. But first and foremost, I want to.
It tough. Was she in the Navy? I heard the Navy folks like their coffee so you can stand a fork up in it.
Who's that?
Tig Lily. She calls it techie coffee, and no, just brewed is perfect.
Well, I happen to know Tig Lily fairly well, and I know that the amount of coffee that is consumed is amazing. is
The lining
amazing.
of the stomach is leather at this point.
I would say that's probably not that far off. So, well, anyways, guys, we're at an hour now. We certainly appreciate it. Let's see, we have one more comment. Jet fuel, there you go. And so, anyhow, I hope that everybody enjoyed the show. I hope that that you all will join us next week. This will be rebroadcast. It'll be up on both the Nurse Dave channel, Nurse Dave Shaving World, and Barbara Dave's Shaving and such very soon. So, on behalf of Dave, we really appreciate you being here. Please join us next time around, and I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the week, and we'll see you next Monday.
Peace. Thanks, guys. Yeah, howdy.